Nathan, a name whispered on the wind, a name synonymous with kindness. He possessed a heart of gold, a beacon of hope in a world often shrouded in darkness. People gravitated to his warmth, his genuine smile. Nathan saw the good in everyone. He believed in the power of second chances, the potential for redemption in even the most hardened souls. His generosity knew no bounds. He would give the shirt off his back, the last dollar in his pocket, without a second thought. But the world, it seemed, operated on a different wavelength. His kindness was often mistaken for weakness, his generosity a vulnerability to exploit. Time and again, Nathan found himself taken advantage of, his trust betrayed, his spirit bruised. Yet his faith in humanity remained unbroken. He clung to the belief that one day his kindness would be met with kindness in return. Life had dealt Nathan a difficult hand. Financial struggles were a constant companion, casting a shadow over his days. Love, too, seemed to elude him. He yearned for a connection, a soulmate to share his life with. His kind nature, while endearing, seemed to attract the wrong kind of people. Those who sought to exploit his generosity, to use his good nature for their own gain. He found himself trapped in a cycle of giving and disappointment. Each betrayal chipped away at his spirit, leaving him questioning his own judgment. Why did he always see the best in people, even when they showed him their worst? Why did he continue to open his heart, knowing it might be broken again? The answer, he realized, lay in the core of his being. Kindness was not a weakness, but a strength. It was his defining characteristic, the very essence of who he was, and he refused to let the cruelty of others extinguish the light that burned within him. The rain poured relentlessly, mirroring the turmoil brewing inside Nathan. He sought refuge in a dimly lit coffee shop, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee a faint comfort. He sank into a worn leather chair, his thoughts a tangled mess. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the counter. A young woman, her clothes drenched, her eyes wild with desperation, pleaded with the barista. "Please, I just need a cup of hot water. I have money, I promise." The barista, a burly man with a permanent scowl, refused. No loitering, buy something or leave. Nathan watched, his heart aching for the woman's desperation. She looked so lost, so alone. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He rose from his chair and approached the counter. "I'll buy her a coffee," he offered, his voice soft but firm. The barista shot him a skeptical look but relented. Nathan turned to the woman, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "Come on, sit down. Let me buy you a coffee, and maybe something to eat?" The woman hesitated, her gaze wary. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because everyone deserves a little kindness," Nathan replied, his voice filled with sincerity. Her name was Emily, and she was trapped in the clutches of addiction. Heroin had sunk its teeth into her, dragging her down a dark and dangerous path. Nathan listened intently as Emily, her voice trembling, shared her story. She spoke of a life shattered by loss, of the pain that gnawed at her soul. Drugs had become her escape, her only solace. He couldn't condone her lifestyle. His upbringing, steeped in religious values, painted a stark contrast to Emily's reality. Yet, he couldn't turn his back on her. He saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a desperate yearning for something more. "I want to get better," Emily confessed, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know how." Nathan, his heart filled with a surge of compassion, made a decision. "I'll help you," he offered, his voice firm with resolve. "I can't promise it will be easy, but I'll be here for you, every step of the way." Emily looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. No one had ever offered her such unwavering support before. No one had ever believed in her. A glimmer of hope ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, this kind stranger was the answer to her prayers. Section 3. A Glimmer of Hope. Nathan's days took on a new rhythm. He juggled his own struggles with Emily's recovery, his determination unwavering. He attended support group meetings with her, offering words of encouragement when her resolve faltered. He helped her find a therapist, a beacon of light in the darkness of addiction. He celebrated her small victories, the days without a fix, the moments of clarity that pierced through the haze. Emily, in turn, found solace in Nathan's presence. His unwavering belief in her, his genuine kindness, chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. She had never known such unconditional love, such unwavering support. Nathan saw past her flaws, past the scars of addiction, and recognized the woman she longed to be. As weeks turned into months, Emily began to heal. Color returned to her cheeks, a spark ignited in her eyes. She found a job, a small apartment, a sense of normalcy she had almost forgotten. Nathan watched her transformation with a mixture of pride and awe. He had witnessed the resilience of the human spirit, the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. For the first time in a long time, a flicker of hope ignited within his own heart. Maybe, just maybe, he had finally found someone who deserved his love, someone who wouldn't betray his trust. Section 1. A Betrayal of Trust. Emily blossomed. Free from the clutches of addiction, her true beauty shone through. Her laughter, once rare and hesitant, now filled Nathan's days with music. They spent countless hours together, sharing their hopes, their dreams, their fears. Nathan found himself falling deeply in love. Emily was everything he had ever wished for. She was kind, compassionate, and strong. She had overcome so much, and her resilience inspired him. He believed that they had found something truly special, a love that could weather any storm. One evening, as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the park where they sat, Nathan decided to bare his soul. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I love you. I love you more than words can say." Emily's smile faltered, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her features. "Nathan, she began, her voice hesitant. Before she could finish, a voice cut through the air. "Emily, is that you?" A tall, handsome man emerged from the shadows, a smug grin on his face. He wrapped his arm around Emily's waist, possessiveness radiating from him. "Nathan, this is Mark," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "My boyfriend." Section 2. The Transformation. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Nathan's heart shattered into a million pieces, the pain so intense it took his breath away. All those months of unwavering support, of believing in Emily, of loving her unconditionally, amounted to nothing. He had been played for a fool. Emily tried to explain, but her words were lost in the roar of betrayal that raged inside Nathan. He couldn't bear to hear her excuses, her justifications. He felt sick to his stomach, the taste of bile rising in his throat. He stumbled away from them, his legs feeling like lead. The rain began to fall, cold and relentless, mirroring the icy grip of despair that enveloped him. He had vowed never to let himself be hurt like this again. And yet, here he was, more broken than ever before. Something inside Nathan snapped that night. Gone was the kind, gentle soul who saw the good in everyone. In its place grew a cold, hard shell, a protective barrier against the pain of the world. He dyed his hair a shocking shade of platinum blonde, a stark contrast to his once ordinary brown locks. He traded his worn jeans and t-shirts for ripped leather jackets and tight black jeans. He pierced his ears, the glint of silver a symbol of his transformation. Section 3. A Twist of Fate. Nathan poured his pain, his anger, his rage into his music. He had always been musically gifted, but now his songs took on a raw, visceral quality that resonated with audiences. His voice, once soft and melodic, now rasped with a newfound intensity. He embraced the rock and roll lifestyle, the drugs, the alcohol, the endless parade of women. He sought oblivion in the arms of strangers, the fleeting pleasure a temporary balm to the ache in his soul. He became everything he had once despised, a walking contradiction of his former self. His band, aptly named Aftermath, quickly gained a loyal following. Their music, fueled by Nathan's pain and anger, struck a chord with listeners who had also experienced the sting of betrayal and heartbreak. Nathan became a star, his face plastered on magazine covers, his name on everyone's lips. One night, after a particularly raucous gig, Nathan found himself at a bar he frequented. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the scent of spilled beer. He sat hunched over a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing little to numb the emptiness inside him. He glanced up, his gaze drawn to a familiar figure across the room. Emily. She had changed. Gone were the revealing clothes and heavy makeup. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. But it was her eyes that struck him the most. They were filled with a newfound serenity, a quiet strength that he had never seen before. He watched as she greeted a group of people, her smile genuine and warm. They were all dressed similarly, their faces radiating a sense of peace that Nathan craved. He realized with a jolt that they were all holding Bibles. Emily had found religion. Section 1, A Cruel Twist of Fate. A bitter laugh escaped Nathan's lips, the sound harsh and humorless. The irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. The girl who had shattered his heart, the girl who had driven him to embrace the darkness, had found solace in the very thing he had abandoned: faith. He watched her from afar, his gaze lingering on her face. She looked happy, content, the very emotions that seemed so foreign to him now. He felt a surge of anger, of resentment. It wasn't fair. She got to move on, to find peace, while he was left to drown in the wreckage of his own making. He had become everything he had once despised. A man fueled by anger, by bitterness, by a thirst for revenge that could never be quenched. He had traded his soul for fame and fortune, and in the process, he had lost himself completely. The sight of Emily, her face aglow with newfound faith, was a stark reminder of everything he had lost, everything he could never have again. His fingers tightened around his glass, the urge to smash it against the wall almost overwhelming. Section 2. The Mask and the Man. Nathan knew he couldn't stay here, couldn't subject himself to the torture of watching Emily live a life he could only dream of. He drained his glass in one gulp, the whiskey burning a trail down his throat, and stood up to leave. As he turned to go, their eyes met across the crowded bar. Emily's eyes widened in recognition, a flicker of something akin to regret flashing across her features. He met her gaze with a cold stare, a mask of indifference hiding the turmoil that raged within him. He saw the question forming on her lips, the hesitant step she took towards him, but he didn't give her the chance to speak. He turned on his heel and strode out of the bar, leaving her standing there, a ghost from a past he couldn't escape. The night air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and the distant wail of sirens. He lit a cigarette, the nicotine a familiar burn in his lungs, and hailed a cab. As the city lights blurred past the window, he closed his eyes, trying to block out the image of Emily's face. But it was no use. She was under his skin, a constant reminder of his own failings. He had built his entire persona, his rock star image, on the foundation of her betrayal. And now, seeing her again, he realized how hollow it all was. The following days were a blur of rehearsals, interviews, and late-night parties. He threw himself into his music, using it as a shield against the memories that threatened to consume him. But no matter how hard he tried to escape, Emily's ghost haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had unfinished business with her. He had never given her a taste of her own medicine, had never made her feel the pain she had inflicted on him. A dangerous idea began to take root in his mind, fueled by his anger and a twisted sense of justice. He started frequenting the same places he knew Emily and her church group gathered. He would sit in his car across the street from the soup kitchen where she volunteered, watching her every move. He knew it was obsessive, unhealthy even, but he couldn't help himself. One evening, he saw her leaving the church alone. He had parked a safe distance away, hidden in the shadows, but he knew she wouldn't recognize his car. He started the engine and followed her, keeping a safe distance. He watched as she walked down the deserted street, her head down, her arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. He could almost hear her humming a hymn, the sound both beautiful and infuriating. This was his chance. He could run her off the road, make her pay for what she had done. But as he gripped the steering wheel, a flicker of doubt gave him pause. Was this really who he was now? A man who sought revenge on a woman who had found redemption? He pulled up alongside her, rolling down the window. "Emily?" he called out, his voice a raspy whisper in the night. Emily stopped, her head snapping up, surprise etched on her face. Recognition dawned, and her eyes widened. Nathan? He saw the way her gaze swept over him, taking in the changes. The platinum blonde hair, the leather jacket, the hard glint in his eyes. He knew she saw a stranger, a far cry from the kind, gentle soul she once knew. "Get in," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. "We need to talk." He watched the play of emotions across her face, hesitation, fear, a flicker of the old curiosity that had always drawn him to her. He saw her glance back towards the church, a beacon of safety in the encroaching darkness. I don't think that's a good idea, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It's late and get in, he repeated, his voice cold, brooking no argument. She hesitated for a moment longer, then, to his surprise, she did as he asked. He watched her in the rearview mirror as he pulled away from the curb, her body tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. You've changed, she said finally, her voice soft, tinged with sadness. He let out a harsh laugh. You think so? Look who's talking. Saint Emily, the reformed sinner. He saw her flinch at his words, and a cruel satisfaction coursed through him. He had hurt her, and for a fleeting moment, it felt good. It was a balm to the festering wound she had left on his soul. What do you want, Nathan? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why are you doing this? Why? He echoed, turning to face her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and something darker, something he couldn't quite name. Maybe I just wanted to see if it was true, if you really had changed, if all that piety was just an act. He saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes, and he knew he had struck a nerve. Good. Let her feel the pain. Let her experience a fraction of the agony he had endured. He parked the car in a secluded spot overlooking the city, the glittering lights a stark contrast to the darkness that had settled over their conversation. He turned to face her, his gaze raking over her, taking in the way her simple dress clung to her curves, the way her eyes, once filled with such warmth, now held a flicker of apprehension. You've gotten more beautiful, he said, his voice a low murmur, the words seeming to surprise even himself. He saw the color rise in her cheeks, a flicker of something akin to desire in her eyes. And he knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could have her. He could break her down, seduce her, make her forget all her newfound piety. He leaned closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. He felt her tremble beneath his touch, her breath catching in her throat. Nathan, don't, she whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and something else, something that sounded suspiciously like longing. Don't what, Emily? He murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. Don't do this? Don't remind you of what we had? What you threw away? He felt her resistance crumble, her body leaning into his touch, her eyes closing as if in surrender. He could taste her perfume, a sweet, intoxicating scent that filled his senses, driving away the last vestiges of reason. He kissed her then, his lips crashing down on hers, erasing her whispered protests. It was a kiss fueled by anger, by resentment, by years of suppressed longing. But as he felt her respond, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing closer, the lines began to blur. Desire, raw and untamed, surged through him, drowning out the whispers of guilt that tugged at his conscience. He tasted tears on her lips, salt mingling with the sweetness of her mouth, and for a fleeting moment, he remembered the girl she used to be. The girl who had captured his heart with her vulnerability, her desperate need for love. But the memory was fleeting, chased away by the heat of the moment, the desperate need to possess her, to make her his, if only for a night. He wanted to erase the pain, the betrayal, to rewrite the ending of their story. He wanted to feel whole again, even if it meant shattering her in the process. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her moans a symphony of surrender. He felt her walls crumble, her defenses dissolving beneath the onslaught of his touch, his kisses. And in that moment of raw, primal connection, he felt a surge of triumph, a cruel satisfaction that he had been the one to break her. The night spun away from them, a whirlwind of passion and regret. They clung to each other, two souls adrift in a sea of darkness, seeking solace in the wreckage of their shared past. But as the sky began to lighten, casting a pale glow across the city, the weight of their actions settled over them. Emily lay beside him, her naked body a stark contrast to the white sheets, her hair fanned out across the pillow like a halo. He watched her sleep, her chest rising and falling with each breath, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He had done it. He had taken his revenge, had tasted the bitter fruit of her pain. But instead of the satisfaction he had craved, He felt only a hollow emptiness, a gaping wound in his soul that even her surrender couldn't heal. He saw the flicker of vulnerability in her sleeping face, the way her lips curved into a soft smile, and the ghost of his old self, the kind, gentle soul he had buried beneath layers of anger and bitterness, stirred within him. He wanted to reach out, to smooth the hair away from her face, to apologize for the hurt he had inflicted. But the words wouldn't come. He was a fraud, a monster who had used her kindness, her faith, as weapons against her. He rose from the bed, each movement a monumental effort, and dressed in silence. He didn't dare look back at her, afraid of what he might see in her eyes: accusation, pain, the reflection of his own self-loathing. He slipped out of the apartment, leaving behind the scent of her perfume, the echo of her moans, the bitter taste of victory that felt more like defeat. He walked for hours, the city streets a blur of noise and color, trying to outrun the demons that clawed at his conscience. He had sought to break her, to make her feel the pain he had carried for so long. But in the process, he had only broken himself further, shattering the remnants of his own humanity. The ashes of his revenge choked him, leaving him gasping for air, desperate for a way to cleanse himself of the dirt, the shame that clung to him like a second skin. He had won, but at what cost? He had gained the world, but in the process, he had lost his soul. He had sacrificed his kindness, his compassion, his very identity at the altar of revenge. And now, all that remained was a hollow shell of a man, haunted by the ghost of the person he used to be, the person he could never be again. Fame, fortune, adoration, Nathan had it all. His music blared from every radio, his face plastered on countless magazine covers. He was living the rockstar dream, surrounded by a coterie of hangers-on, each one feeding his ego, fueling his descent into darkness. Yet behind the glittering facade, a profound emptiness gnawed at him. The roar of the crowd, the intoxicating rush of the stage, couldn't drown out the whispers of his conscience, the haunting memory of Emily's tear-stained face as he slipped away that morning. The world saw a rock god, a master of his universe. But in the silence of his own thoughts, Nathan saw the truth. He was a prisoner in a gilded cage of his own making, the price of his fame paid in the currency of his soul. Every song he wrote, every chord he struck, was tainted with the bitter aftertaste of what he'd done. His music, once a source of solace and release, now felt like a constant reminder of his fall from grace. He had sought to numb the pain with fleeting pleasures, to fill the void with meaningless encounters. But the emptiness remained, a constant companion in the glittering wasteland of his fame. Revenge, he realized, was a double-edged sword. While it had brought a fleeting sense of satisfaction, it had come at a devastating cost. He had not only destroyed Emily's trust, but he had also shattered the last vestiges of his own moral compass. Nathan had conquered the world, only to find himself utterly defeated. His victory was a hollow shell, a Pyrrhic triumph that had cost him everything he once held dear. His journey from a kind-hearted young man to a hardened rock star served as a tragic testament to the destructive power of heartbreak and revenge. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on a stage, but within the depths of our own souls. And sometimes the most devastating losses are self-inflicted.